Right, and we are live. Hello, everyone. My name is Sourabhi Dutta Roy, and I'm currently pursuing my master's in English from Loreto College, Kolkata. I would like to welcome you all to the stories of tribal identity and culture that will explore the role of tribal history and tribal representation in history in shaping cultural identity and ideology, curated under TMYS's review Summer 2023 in collaboration with the Center for Asia Pacific Initiatives, University of Victoria. We are also calling for submissions of essays, poems, and short stories related to the project. To know more about our submission guidelines and project architecture, please visit www.tellmeastory.biz. The topic for today is When Women Become Witch, the Dark Stories, under the sub-theme The Ever-Changing Status of Women in Tribal Communities. This evening, I consider myself very privileged to be in the company of our esteemed panelists who will be sharing their views with us shortly. So, before we open the discussion, then I'd now like to briefly introduce each of our speakers to the audience. Our first speaker for the session is Dr. Shashank Sinha, who is an independent researcher currently working as publishing director at Routledge, South Asia. Earlier, he taught undergraduate courses in history at the University of Delhi for almost a decade. Dr. Sinha is the author of Restless Mothers and Turbulent Daughters, Situating Tribes in Gender Studies and Delhi, and Agra Fatehpur Sikri Studies and Delhi Agra Fatehpur Sikri Monuments, Cities and Connected Histories. He is currently co-editing Gender in Modern India, History, Culture, Marginality for Oxford University Press. We are delighted to have you with us, sir. Thank you for joining. Our next speaker for the session is Ms. Anamika Baruah, who is an executive member of Mission Birubala, an NGO fighting against witch hunting across Assam. She has worked in Snehalaya, another NGO in Guwahati, working for child rights as the coordinator for April 2016 to 2022. She has also interpreted a presentation on witch hunting by Padma Shri Birubala Rabha in Lok Sabha Secretariat on March 22, 2022, and worked in a project of ICSSR, Government of India project on witch hunt violence against women in India, a study in socio-legal policy recommendations and response. We're delighted to have you with us, ma'am. Thank you for joining.
Namaste. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we then introduce our third speaker, we'll wait for him to join. I would before we open the discussion, then I'd like Dr. Sinha to take over from him to share his views with us.
Thank you, Sourabhi. That the format that we have for 10 minutes each, I would rather like to share, basically, or talk about, some stereotypes or, in terms of popular assumptions about witch hunting in India. I'm a student of history and I work at the intersections of history and anthropology. And I have been observing this thing in the kind of a very long-term perspective from around 1820s to around to current times, basically. So the primary entry point was Chotanagpur and Santhal Parganas, which constitute the state of Jharkhand. But over a period of time, I have diversified my research into other geographies and cultures too, basically. So what I plan to do today in the lecture today is to basically talk about dominant assumptions and unpopular stereotypes about witch hunting in India. But before I do that, one of the things I'd like to just differentiate or distinguish before we start is basically this difference between witch killing and witch hunting. So witch killing is very self-explanatory, in which the accused are often killed. Those who are accused of witchcraft are killed. But witch hunting is a more pervasive thing, basically, which is, they continue to suffer and in different ways. So there are layers of violence, sometimes recurring violence, and, one after in succession, but not in any defined parameter, because there's a lot of randomness involved there in this. So witch hunting is more pervasive than witch killing. And then this whole idea about witch hunting has changed over a period of time. I've been looking at this practice, for over, more than 175, 200 years, basically. And I've seen some very distinct changes over a period of time. My first thing that I go into is that, socially and geographically, the practice of witch hunting is more widespread than what is popularly assumed, basically. So I'm talking about some contemporary trends, and I'm aware that, the people who would be watching would be more from, an interdisciplinary pool, So I think, I'm talking about some basic contemporary trends. So geographically, when we look at geographically in terms of modern states, the only source of information that we have for the witch killings or authoritative or the government source of information is the NCRB data, which is National Council of NCRB data, uh, National Crime Records Bureau, and which is the only source of which it has the annual report called Crimes in India. So and then there in the Crimes of India report, you find witch killings or murders arising of witchcraft in a section on violent crimes and in a section on murders, basically, right? So that is where you get that thing. Now, according to this NCRB figures, we have around 3,000, minimum of 3,000 people have been killed on account of or murdered is the word they use, on account of practicing witchcraft, which means an annual of 150 figures. Now, there's a major gap in the figures that are given by the NCRB, or the Crimes of India report. First, it only talks about the cases registered with the police. So the cases which are not registered, and which are very significant number of cases which are not actually registered with the police, are never come into play in this thing. The second thing is it only looks at witchcraft or witch killing as the primary motive. So there could be variety of motives involved, such as land grabbing, such as jealousy, such as some tensions in the neighborhood, or something like that. There are many other factors which I'll be talking about, but they talk about the principal offense as the primary category. So principal offense only in cases which were registered by the police. Also, the figures which the NCRB gives are all figures on witch killings. There's no figure on witch hunting, basically, which is more pervasive, as I said in the beginning. And as we see that there are gaps, huge gaps sometimes, between the NCRB data and the media reports, or on field surveys, things like that. Now, even if we go by the NCRB data on which killings, that's, I'm only talking about killings now, almost 10 out of 28 states, which is more than one third, report killings, and have been reporting killings, consistently. The numbers may vary, with an exception of few years from the last 10 to 15 years time, basically, right? So something like Gujarat or Rajasthan or Andhra Pradesh or Maharashtra, that's one from the western thing, to Chhattisgarh or Madhya Pradesh, to Bihar, Jharkhand, Odisha, and Assam, basically. So the entire central India belt, with the northeast projections and the westward projections, which is what is known as now something like a hotspot of the witch killings, or witch hunting, basically. And there are some occasional incidents which are also reported from other states, such as basically West Bengal or Karnataka, now Telangana or Uttar Pradesh. Recently there have been stray cases from Meghalaya, Himachal Pradesh, Manipur. So it is more widespread than what we say, that basically geographically more widespread than what is popularly assumed. And now I come to the social occurrence, the occurrence of witch hunting among other scheduled castes, basically the Dalits, OBCs, or the other backward classes, Muslims, it dents this typical stereotypical formulation that, witch hunting or the practice of witch hunting is confined to the Adivasis alone. Right, in 2010, Haryana was a leading area in terms of witch killings, in according to the NCRB data, and was reporting killings consistently over the past 5 years before 2010, when it was the state recording the top figures in terms of witch killings. So what it means is basically that which the practice is more common among marginalized communities, which are either inhabiting, and I'm using it slightly simplistically, marginalized communities which are inhabiting the social, which means the caste and class, and geographical, which means remote location fringes, basically. What can also be said with a relative certainty, or not relative, but with comparatively more certainty, is that basically very few cases are reported from higher class and dominant social groups. And now I come to two other dominant assumptions which are noticed, or which are very very conspicuous in the discourses or writings on witch hunting. The first one is very common among the administrators, policy makers, development professional, journalists, and media people. where this thing about there is a lot of emphasis on superstition, therefore calling it a primitive or or a medieval practice, or a lack of health, or a lack of education, right? And therefore the stereotypes about this happens among primitive or medieval, or it's a medieval practice or a primitive practice, and which is exclusive to the Adivasis, right? So that is one of the first set of assertions that you could see there. The second set, which you see mostly in academic writings and also in terms of activists, is basically that witch hunting has to do exclusively with gender and patriarchy. While there are elements, these two set of discourses, or these two set of factors which happen in the writings do figure in as elements in witch hunting, but this do not present in itself present the complete picture. And therefore I always bring in this element of basically the role of the regional and the spatial context, basically, and that it is a complex interplay of various kinds of motivations which are where the structural, contextual, and individual factors play a very big role, right? And when we talk about motivations, there are various motivations, not just about basically about the patriarchy or gender thing, but also related issues like you could have land grabbing, you have social tensions in the village, or the village tensions, the jealousies, there's the notions of identity politics, lots of other things, basically sexual assaults, or advances, spurning down of sexual assaults, advances. But even when you look at academic research, and I'm just, because there's limited time, so I'll just quote two or three good examples that academic research in regions have offered, basically, right? So when you look at a case study of Assam, basically, so besides the usual things that we talked about, the two set of factors, things like identity politics or ethnic conflicts or ethnic revivalism or politics of modulation are also very connected to the issues of witch hunting, right? Likewise, in cases like, there's another work on Jalpaiguri where it talks about, academic research in Jalpaiguri, it talks about, and I can say the names, Shoma Chaudhary, basically, it talks about, conflicts between Adivasis, and the plantation management, So it talks about the migrant Adivasi workers, so it's about sociology connected with the sociology of work as well, which is where the migrant Adivasis workers and the plantation management in Jalpaiguris, or how even the caste dynamics play a very important role in witch hunting in, say, Chhattisgarh or Rajasthan. But yes, that is true that the practice is very, very pervasive among the Adivasi tribes, or the Adivasis, or the tribes of the Central Indian Belt. And that brings us to one of the other interesting bits, basically, that witch hunting, the practice of witch hunting is a much more, and that's my principal argument, is that a much more multi-layered and a much multi-dimensional things, multi-dimensional phenomenon. There are a lot of layers involved, and how these have changed over a period of time. And even if we apply the recent research to the gender dimensions, it also debunks several other myths about witch hunting, which is the earlier thing about that only single mothers or only single women or widows uh, are basically the prime victims. And the recent reports from fields also indicates that it's not just, or old women, even that also included the old women, because they could fit into the old hag image of the witches, basically. But the recent research, or field reports also debunk this notion, is that mid-married women in the age group of 30 to 60 are more likely to be some kind of a primary uh, victims of witch hunting, basically. And with that, I come to one of the the last formulations before I talk about just briefly about the law, the legal applications, is that this idea about witch hunting is it's a dynamic phenomena. In my own research in Chotanagpur and Santhalpatinas, from around 1820s to around current times, I have seen this whole phenomena has evolved. Even the constructions of witches have changed. The dominant constructions of witches have changed over a period of time, as also the ways of dealing with them. So witch hunting, so while in the earlier times you would see about killing, witch killings, banishments, or fines, basically, and from that it has changed, basically, considerably. And in the more recent decades, what you see is basically feeding of excreta or filth, public shaming, sexual assaults, rape, violence, parading in public, stripping and parading in public. And one thing I can say with great, certainty in terms of my own academy, as far as my own academic research is concerned, is that, public shaming or humiliation or, sexual assaults or rape are very recent phenomena, right? And the idea is that the violation of bodies, the ideas of violation of bodies, which are seen as repositories of shame and honor, and these also reflect the influences of the caste societies as well. So, as I can say that this whole practice has changed over a period of time, and there are spatial variations and there are temporal variations, basically. But in the recent times, you see some very, very dominant trends, alongside this, feeding of excreta or filth or killing or, ostracization, where, the community doesn't talk to you or has nothing to do with you. They ostracize you, or even, dislocation, or causing problems for your livelihood. And finally, let me come to the section about the legislations as well. And so you have around six state legislations, specific special legislations in different states, and two generic legislations. So six, special legislations would include, the two acts, in Jharkhand, Bihar at first, and Jharkhand in 2000, 2001. Then you had the Chhattisgarh Act, special act about dealing with witch hunting, in which is around 2005. 2013 you had the Odisha Act, and then 2015 you had, Assam and Rajasthan. And the very evolution of these legislations also tell us that how this whole practice of witch hunting has changed over a period of time. So whereas in the earlier legislations were very basic, which were just about, identifying and, identifications, of people. Those were people who were identified as witches and were subjected to physical or mental torture, and there were very, smaller punishments for that. As opposed to that, in the later legislations, the gendered element or the sexual element also started coming into play, basically. So, and also that the whole lot of stakeholders are involved. So the idea of collective fines, public shaming for, or punishments for assaults of different kinds. Also, ideas about, rehabilitation, medical assistance, all these started coming into play, and the punishments started becoming more, basically they were, heavier, or stronger or more severe punishments, basically, than what you could see in the earlier acts. But what is an interesting thing is that the special laws work in conjunction with what is called the Indian Penal Code, basically. And more often than not, it is the provisions of the Indian Penal Code that are invoked, or certainly invoked in an earlier stages, which prevents the escalation of something, of a witch hunting, and, a kind of putting the crime in the right perspective or the right context, as basically. Also, while, the IPC provisions are mostly bailable, as opposed to the one under special laws, which are cognizable and non-bailable in character, basically. And to give you some examples, basically, some of most provisions of the IPC fail to capture the intensity of the depth of the violence or the vulnerability. So, for instance, like consuming excreta or filth, or, making them lick spit, or, preventing access to public spaces, or stoning, or forcing them to take oaths, or forcing the accused to take oaths, would come under simple injury and voluntary, or clauses like voluntary causing hurt, which would invite a punishment of 1 year, punishment of 1 year, and or, payment of rupees 1,000 rupees. Likewise, the provisions related to sexualized or gender-based violence are inadequate. So, outraging the modesty of women is the common clause invoked, which would involve 2 years in prison, or unless until complicated by other offenses. But most importantly, neither the IPC nor the special laws, have into play or have factored in the long-term, consequences of witch hunting, which is basically the dislocation, loss of livelihoods, and also the principles of restorative justice. I'd end here. Thank you.
Right, thank you, sir, for sharing your insights with us. Moving on, I would like to request Ms. Baruah to share her thoughts on the topic. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Uh, I'm Anamika Baruah, and I'm a social activist, and along with that, I am also the director of a company, which is a biotechnology research center, and we are incubated at IIT Guwahati. Now, coming to the issue of witch hunting in Assam, I agree with my co-panelist that now it is not witch hunting, rather it is witch killing. Witch hunting exists among the tribes and the Adivasis of the state of Assam, and now it is mainly on the pretext of witch hunting, people are killed by some miscreants of the same village. But after 2018, the Assam Witch Hunting Act came into function, and we have seen that some of the cases in witch hunting cases have come down to some extent, and we are very thankful to the government of India that they have brought this act. And I would like to say that uh, in the witch hunting cases, mostly when the victims they undergo uh, psychological trauma, physical pain, and plus, they are ostracized from the villages. And their traumas, their pain, they are, beyond our assumption sometimes. I have done case studies of the victims, and, I found out that family is devastated. There are some incidents in which you'll be very surprised, the way they were accused as witches. Witches don't exist. I would like to emphasize there's no witch, but, there is the fate. The people of, the tribal peoples and the Adivasis, they have a fate that witches exist. And with this fate, they try to instigate some people, the superstitious people, against some particular individuals. They have vested interest, like land grabbing. Then they have, sometimes they have sexual desires, towards some woman. And when the woman, rejects the sexual advances, they try to accuse them as witches. There are some other excuses or reasons, like, some jealousy is there, or some enmity is there. So in that pretext of witch hunting, they try to clean those people from their way. In the Assam Witch Hunting Act, there's some sections I would like to point out, very important sections. Number one is whoever assaults or uses criminal force against the person accusing him or her to be a witch shall be punished with death or life imprisonment. Very important section of the act. Then one most important is that whoever intimidates a person accusing or stigmatizing him or her a witch or compelling the person to commit suicide shall be punished with imprisonment not less than 7 years and liable to pay a fine of rupees 1 lakh to 5 lakhs. I have been fighting against witch hunting since 2017, along with Padma Shri Biruwala Rabha. So, and I have organized many awareness camps in the remote areas of Assam, and I have seen that yes, the awareness programs are effective in, in helping to prevent witch hunting cases. Um, and I have taken the help of other social activists, then the police, to organize these awareness programs. And I'd like to point out that the witch hunting cases, I think, are the main is a result of lack of education and quality healthcare in the remote areas of Assam. Because what happens that people they are very in those remote areas. I have gone and I have seen that there is absence of school. Even in primary level, school is absent, and there is no healthcare facility. So in that situation, the people, the illiterate people, I will say, I will use the word illiterate. And they, what happens when they fall sick, they are not going to a physician, they are not going to a qualified physician, rather they are going to a bas or tantric or some those kind of rural physicians who are not qualified. And when those physicians or those tantrics they are unable to cure them, they give the excuse of witches, presence of witches who have done black magic or who have done something wrong on them, and that's why they are not, they are not get overcoming the sicknesses. And those people are very superstitious because of lack of education, and all these kind problems are there, in the rural, remote areas, basically. So, and they tend to believe, yes, this particular person has done something bad on me, and that's why I'm falling sick, or I'm having this problem. Some problems are going on in his household and all these things. So they believe that someone has done black magic on them, and in that situation they try to chase away those people, or kill them, or clean those people from their way. And there are some vested interests, as I have said earlier also, that land grabbing, sexual desires, enmity, jealousies are always there, which the miscreants or the accused, they use against some individuals. So I would like to and you know
Right. Thank you, ma'am, for sharing your insights with us. So I'd like to move on to the Q&A session now. My first question is for Dr. Sinha. In your book, Restless Mothers and Turbulent Daughters, Situating Tribes in Gender Studies, you have talked about the gender ideology being reproduced in tribal society. How do you think gender constructions are instrumental in perpetuating women's subjugation and exploitation in tribal society, where witch hunting episodes are more prevalent? And how do you think these restless mothers and turbulent daughters have created history and stories of their own? Sir, you're on mute. If you could unmute yourself.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Uh, I think this book I wrote many years ago, around 2005 2006, and the primary idea behind writing this book was, uh, how do you apply a gender lens to the study of tribal societies? So that was my, the dominant idea behind that, because normally, when it would come to comparisons to tribal societies, basically would come under comparison with the caste societies, and it was normally held that the tribal societies are more egalitarian, right? So this kind of a stereotype, uh, we could notice in many of the writings in that, basically. And by doing that, by applying the gender lens to the tribal societies, I was also talking about representations of tribes, basically in a certain way, right? And also about about how tribes are represented and how women within tribes are represented. So there were two levels, basically. And I consciously used gender as a framework because the idea was that you were seeing them in relation to men. Now, I talked about in that book, I was, and when I go back and I see that, I talked about three different systems, basically. One is patriarchy, the second is colonialism, and the third is capitalism, and how they intersect with each other to create new structures and conditions of subordination. So that was my primary thing on that. And where I argued, I remember that in this is in the pre-colonial era that the tribal societies had already started disintegrating, basically, and the idea, the communitarian uh, character was getting lost, basically. And how over a period of time there are certain elements which are very, very, some which are very noticeable, things like discriminatory land rights. So women do not cannot own lands. So they can have a right to a piece of land, which are again subject to lots of conditions, basically, but they cannot own land. It always passes through the male. Is a male inheritance principle that is applied, which is a principle which was upheld by the colonial rule as well, when they were doing the survey and settlement reports in the late 19th, early 20th century. The prevalence of witch hunts, so discriminatory land rights, prevalence of witch hunts, controls over women's sexuality, a discriminatory taboo regime, a very widespread taboo regime that you see over a process of time. Their absence, or from the political bodies and decision making processes, and also the gender division of labor, which was strengthened by a widespread taboo regime, which kept them out of the core production activities. So this is where so which hunting or which construction of witches formed a very small part of this work. It was more about representations of tribes and application of the gender principles, and that's how my second work emerged, which is upon witch hunting, because I thought there was a lot more to be said, and I actually did a much wider, study on witch hunting and Adivasis, and how within these systems, how the new land and forest and legislations which were defined by the courts of law brought in a very significant diminution in the traditional division of labor, besides relegating them to marginalized agricultural laborers and wage workers, basically. And how the development of capitalist enterprises, the industries, the plantations, both with the colonial capital and outside of it, basically they created conditions where women, or mostly this women now emerge mostly as migrant workers or wage laborers, and ensuring some kind of a class subjugation. So it's a long study which talks about from around 1830s to around, more about till 1980s, but it's more about representations of women and how experiences of women and how women experience these three systems, patriarchy, colonialism, and capitalism, and how they resist, some through very dominant ways, and but mostly through very non-visible ways as well, basically. So that's what about that. But witch hunting, as I said, was a small part of it, but not the dominant thrust of it. Witch hunting I did as a separate project, as a kind of a PhD thesis, basically later, after my first book. That's how I did that. Thank you.
Right. My next question is for Ms. Baruah. So, women have always been put to trial for crimes that they have not committed or for simply raising their voices, perhaps. Having closely worked with NGOs like Mission Biruvalla of Padma Shri Biruvalla Rabha, the activist who campaigns against witchcraft and witch hunting, could you reflect some light on the matter using some real life stories or examples that you might have come across?
Yeah, sure. I would like to narrate three stories, three incidents of witch huntings. And in this context, I would like to say that from 2010 to 2020, 152 incidents of witch hunting had taken place in Assam, and out of which 119 people were branded as witches and thereby killed. It is a data from CID Assam. My first incident I would like to narrate is of a lady of Gwalpara, and she actually got married very young, and she had two daughters, and her husband was working in a school, and she became a widow at a very young age. Her husband had passed away at a very early age, and then she was raising her daughters single-handedly. She was working as a labor, and she was running a shop, and that's how she was raising her daughters. And it so happened that one fellow villager, he was also a widower, and he had some interest in her, and he was always, visiting her at night, and making sexual advances. And they used to, the mother, the lady, and her daughters used to chase him away, and it was going on until one day, and she was rejecting his advances, and until one day what happened, she was coming from the market, and then she saw the man was coming towards her with a group of people, and he screamed that she is a witch, Dini. She is a witch and Dini. And then the group who was with him, they began to attack her with, whatever, with the hands, then with sticks, with whatever they had in their hands. And she was, beaten up mercilessly. And after a long time, some, good people, Samaritans were passing by, and they rescued her and admitted her in the hospital. And she was unconscious, and she was in, her body had swollen, and her elder daughter was in the hospital attending her, and the daughter was in pain. They have already lost their father, and what will happen if they lose their mother again? And so about at night, at late night, she regained consciousness, and then after a few days she recovered. And Padma Shri Birwala Rabha, she went to meet her and filed an FIR against that person. This is one story. And after that, that lady, she was so resilient, and she became an activist working against witch hunting. Now she is, she's working against witch hunting. She's also an activist. And the second story I would like to narrate is of a boy, is of a I mean youth of Chirang district, and he had five brothers and sisters, and he was the third brother. And what happened when he cleared his metric exam? His parents were killed as branded as after they were branded as witches. They were killed. It so happened that his father's elder brother, he was sick from a long time, and he, instead of visiting a doctor, they were visiting a local, a village physician, not a physician exactly, but they are called badge in the village. So they were visiting him, and the badge was unable to heal him. And so then the badge said that someone has done wrong on you, someone has done black magic. Okay, and that person is in your family. And after coming away from the from after meeting the badge, they accused of the youth's parents as witches, and they accused them of doing black magic on them, on sorry, on the elderly person, on his brother, elder brother. And so happened that after a few days, and whenever there was any person used to get sick, they were accused of doing something wrong, they were accused of doing black magic. And then one night, some youths came to their house, and they took away them forcefully. They took away them, and there was no whereabouts about them. And in the morning, the dead bodies were found. And after that, the brothers and sisters, they left the village and they came to the city, and they studied. And now the youth is working, and he has got married also. The third story I would like to narrate is also of Chirang district, and it is of a widowed mother and her son. They are farmers, and they're from they have financial crisis. And it happened in during the COVID time. The mother was very sick. She had fever and she was at home. And at night, suddenly some drunken youths, they came to their house and knocked on the door. The son came out, and they asked for his mother. He told them that the mother is very sick and she cannot come out. They said, no, no, you were telling lie. So you please take out your mother. And when the he was unwilling to take out his mother, they went forcefully and took them out, both the mother and the son, and they tied them on a tree in the in the field of the village, and they were beaten up mercilessly. And what happened? The old lady, she is of 75 years, so, and her hip got broken, and after a long treatment, even now she is unable to stand on her feet. I mean, she is unable to walk properly. So the trauma is still there, and they have not received any compensation. And the son, he is only a farmer, and he had taken loan for his mother's treatment, and he's in a very a difficult condition financially now. These are the three incidents from my case studies.
All right, ma'am. My next question is for Dr. Sinha. As both an author and a historian who was born and brought up in the Chotanagpur area, you must have been extremely familiar with the region and its stories. To some extent, then you are an insider. However, your perspective of studying the tribal community may always seem non-tribal to some. In that respect, do you believe that you need to be born or belong to a certain marginalized community in order to be able to tell their stories effectively? And how do you connect with the tribal community and tell their stories with authenticity, being both an insider and an outsider?
That seems like an easy question, but it's actually a very difficult one, and I'm reminded of of a book I had commissioned during my OUP days, which is a book called The Cracked Mirror, which talks about it's a dialogue between Gopal Guru and Sundar Sarkai about representations of the Dalits, basically. Uh, so yes, I have grown up in an area where with surrounded by tribes, basically, and that gives me some kind of an advantage, right? uh, but largely within being more precisely being a regional insider, but an ethnic outsider, right? So I've grown up with that. I'm familiar with the terrain. I'm familiar with the people around. So doing that. But the question is a more complex one, and the representations of are based on a variety of factors, basically, which includes basically applying principles of research, how being skilled at your research tools, how innovatively you use those tools, basically, or deploy those tools, how deep your understanding it is, how impartial you can be, basically, so variety of things. So being an insider is just one of the various factors around that, basically, or a relative insider in my case, basically. So there are several layers and intricacies. My answer to your question would be that I would encourage debate on both the fronts, whether it is insiders and in this type. But the truth is a very, very relative term, or the answers lie somewhere in between them. Basically representations outside of that, outside of the community, and representations from within the community, because there could be various examples where you could be familiar with the community, but you may not be able to see those layers or the intricacies so well, and vice versa. So the answers lies in the terrain, which lies somewhere in between that. So a research which is from within the community, or done by people from within the community, and also research being done by people outside the community, in terms of uh, and also this answer also answered the question of biases as well. So my answer lies somewhere, locating the representation somewhere in between them. Thank you.
Right. My next question is for Ms. Baruah. Witches are very common in the old mythological tales from any part of the globe and its culture. Is there any connection between these witches from the myths and the ones that are declared by the society as such? And do you think that these age-old tales about witches and monsters have affected our mindset in a negative light, and as a result, based our fears in reality? Ma'am, you're on mute. If you could unmute yourself.
Yes, witches existed in myths, and even now there are movies about witches, ghosts, and those are basically to entertain people. And you see in the movies or in myths, the always the antagonist or the bad woman is a witch. But I'd like to emphasize that there is no connection, because those movies or myths, they are mainly for entertainment purpose. And you see the people who are accused as witches, uh, they are very fragile people who have been physically assaulted, accused as witches, and they are unable to help themselves. And there now witch hunting is not is used as a pretext. And you see, the last story which I narrated, the 75-year-old lady was accused as witch, and at the middle of night, she was beaten up along with her son. And all the victims you'll be, able to see that they could not save themselves. And yes, of course, people, there is an impact, because people, start if there is a belief, if they have a faith that witches exist, of course, those things have impacted those mythological stories, or movies, even movies, I will say, they have impact upon people in having this belief. Plus there is religious belief as well, faith as well. And I guess as an activist, I will say that it is very difficult to fight against those beliefs, those faith, because people, they don't like their faith to be intervened, and they don't like when we go and educate them. But it takes time. But yes, with lots of awareness programs and lots of our efforts, they are willing to understand. And I think we need to educate. We need to make the new generations conscious of these things, to get rid of superstitious beliefs, and get rid of these kinds of fates that witches exist or black magic happens. Thank you.
Right. My next question is for Dr. Sinha. Witch hunting trials are thought to be a relic of the medieval era, but in many regions it is still a common practice and remains the harsh realities of women today, even more so if they belong from the marginalized communities like the tribals in India, making their identities twice the more marginalized. You have published a paper on this topic titled Culture of Violence or Violence of Cultures, Adivasis and Witch Hunting in Chota Nagpur. What do you think actually makes a witch, and how do these stereotypical orthodox tales about witches and witch hunt come into existence, especially in the tribal communities?
Uh, I think that I wrote quite a few papers. The paper you mentioned that on witch hunting and about constructions of witches, basically. The paper you mentioned, here, and then I'll come to how it talks about, the ideas of marginality. But before that, let me clarify that, as I clarified in my talk earlier today, that while it's true about many in many tribal communities, it is not limited to the tribal communities, right? And that there is a huge politics of marginality involved here, basically, right? So it's we can see about, as I said, amongst the other backward caste, scheduled caste, Dalits, Muslims. The other communities and other classes, basically have that, idea about that, this thing. When it comes to tribal societies, and this paper in particular that you mentioned has two things, in focus on two things. One is that, how the various players in the larger scenario, right? And then I talk about a time from, as I said, early decades of 19th century to 20th century, basically how are a lot of actors. So basically the Adivasis themselves, the chiefs, uh, or Adivasi leaders, the Ojas, uh, the administrators, the colonial administrators, Christian missionaries, anthropologists, and ethnographers, as well as actors which were involved with development, they've all got a role to play in the making of the witch, or in terms of, contributing in some way or other to this whole practice of witch hunting in music. And this is comes across as very startling, but they all have a role to play. And the second part that the paper deals with is the making of a witch, basically. So as Ms. Baruah was talking about, they come across in myths in various cultures and geographies. So the ideas related to witchcraft, you know, uh, have been in existence and scattered from across cultures and geographies for a very long time. How definite or how indefinite these ideas are subject to debate, but ideas related to that. I'm not saying that the same ideas, but the way in which we use or understand witchcraft today, basically, and the idea of a witch or the construction of a witch is something which I argue in my research and in that paper in also, is that it was more during colonial times that this idea started taking an institutionalized or a crystallized form, the idea of a witch. And you see a shift in the constructions from a witch who is born, to a witch who is trained, basically. So somewhere a witch who is born, and uh, a craft which is hereditary. So if you see representations of witch hunting, you'd see that 1830s, 40s, 50s, 60s, something like that, they were killed. The women who were accused of witchcraft were killed along with their families. The idea was to do away with anybody or offspring who could also be a potential witch. To around 19th, late 19th, early 20th century, when you talk about something like a trained witch which is more powerful and who could impact by various other methods other than buri nazar and basically the look, and and when they say something to you, a kind of evil utterance, and then you have come across as a trained witch who could harm you in several ways, basically. And in this transition, several people had a role to play. So the first thing is basically when you talk about colonialism as an agent and colonial administrators, basically, or colonialism as a condition as well. So the land forest, resources, distancing from land and forest, and the bringing and coming into being of several diseases as well. They create a condition in which many of those uncertainties began to take the form of those which had been induced by witches, basically. So this uncertainty start finding a representation in a particular construction, and they were being seen as a kind of a work of the witches as well. And later, the colonial order institutes a ban on witch killings as well, which was to be punished by capital punishment. And then there is a counter to which, I argued in another paper that in how during 1857 there were witch killings in the region, in the region, primarily in the Singhum region, which I argue was also some kind of a conscious contour of resistance, and it was a kind of an effort to reclaim a lost space as well. And then, basically later in say late 19th, early 20th century, the idea of survey and settlement reports, where they reiterate the traditional principles of land inheritance, whereby male were seen as the land inheritors, which created a kind of an avenue for hunting, which is those women who were in possession of land, could be branded as witches and killed. Though the idea of connection between land holding and women as constructions of witches became more common in the post-colonial times. But when you also see in terms of the advent of Christian missionaries, in the 19th and 20th century, and one of the pretexts for that, basically is that the conversions involved, basically, is how the politics of witchcraft also becomes very important. So conversion, was one of those ways in which you could be saved from the witches. So there's no divided allegiance. So once you come, in the Christian fold, you're saved from witches, basically. So this idea about divided loyalties or divided allegiances, about several bongas or several deities or several spirits, ends there, and you're free from all the problems related. Though that does not happen, and many of the tribal families themselves, only some of their elders or one of those sons or daughters would join the Christian fold, basically. And also through the various the with the coming of and how the census also records, with the coming of industries, with the coming setting up of mines and industries, various castes from different regions start moving to Chotanagpur and Santhal Parganas. And then there is a lot of intermixture, basically, in terms of that, and how values start influencing the rituals associated with, which, so the ordeals, that you have earlier would start giving way to rituals, to sacrifices, to mantras and incantations, to exorcism, basically, rituals, basically, right? And then, late 19th, early 20th century is also a period which is associated with, the coming into being of disciplines like, anthropology, or, ethnography, or, this whole idea about the principles of social Darwinism. And one of those things which was implicit in that was that, they are trying to organize the dark skinned tribes in terms of a racial hierarchy, right? So, and one of the attributes that start coming in when you talk in terms of races and organizing these principles on the racial hierarchy is the elements of, they believe in witchcraft, they believe in spirits. So animism, spiritism, witchcraft, they became essential elements, and the tribes get essentialized in this process. So the idea about the tribes being primitive comes into place, this idea crystallizes during the colonial times as well. Later in the 20th century, you see many of those Adivasi movements use, the witches as, as a way to, strike a rapport with the people. So, for instance, in Birsa Munda, or uh, uh, in the later, movements, basically, between 1820s and 1830s, this is being invoked time and again, basically, how witches are invoked time and again, in terms of doing that. And finally, I talk about, that, and then I say that there's been a slowdown between 1830s, 40s to around 1860s, where the politics of development induced development and the setting up of industries and, mines, led some kind of, what the activists have talked about, some kind of internal colonialism, where the Adivasis were marginalized in the process. They did not get jobs. They were even thrown out of the unskilled labor force. So the development induced, displacement, brings back a lot of uncertainties and also leads to resurgence of witch hunting. So the first phase is about land, which are the more tangible resources. Then other resources also come into play. In the last couple of decades, you see how the influence of caste societies has and globalization has also taken shape. So you see incidents of public shaming and how from an intra-tribe affair it has become a village affair or something which is prevalent in the entire neighborhood. Thank you.
Right, sir. My next question is for Ms. Baruah. We blame patriarchy or a male dominated society for the various neglect that the women go through. However, it is often seen that it is the women who practice these patriarchal norms and subdue other women. Would you like to reflect on this idea in light of the concept of witch hunt?
Yes, I would like to explain on this. But before answering this question, I would like to mention that I have made a very short movie of 35 minutes called Towards Hope, which is mainly for using during the awareness programs against witch hunting. And I hope it will serve the purpose. I wanted to make my awareness programs more effective, and uh, we know that visuals have more impact on people, rather than speeches. Visuals have more impact, and so with this intention, have made the movie. And just last year, I have finished making the movie, and it has already been released. It is not for commercial purpose. It is only for awareness programs. Now, coming to your question, I would like to say that you see, here in Assam, not only women but men are also victims. But male victims are comparatively lesser than women victims. I would like to say that you see, women are, yes, of course, they are victims of this patriarchal system, and they are not allowed to think beyond, to an extent. Even earlier times, they were not allowed to go to school. They were not education, and they were not allowed to undergo education. They were not allowed to go for researches. So in that scenario, I will say yes, they are victims of this patriarchal system. And there is lack of connectivity in the remote areas, and the women are made to believe that yes, this is the fate. You have to believe in this. This is our culture, our religion. It's like that. The patriarchy system works like that. And mostly the instigators are males, and they always instigate the people, because you see, if I'm not superstitious, no one will be instigate me against someone, and uh, to call someone a witch. But the village people, the remote areas people, and especially the tribals and the Adivasis, they have this faith and they're superstitious. So the instigators, it becomes very easy for them to instigate those people against someone. And as I have said earlier, that there is always some vested interest now. It is not, it is only used as a pretext. And yes, there was lack of awareness also. And women, they fear going against the system. They fear to raise the voice. They fear to resist, because it's a system. It's difficult to come out of it. But yes, there are some women, those who have come out of this belief, and they have resisted against this belief, just like Padmashri Birbola Rabha. She is also very from a remote village of Golpara, but she has been able to raise her voice against this belief, and she is still walking against witch hunting. And she is very sincere to this cause, to fight against witch hunting, to eradicate witch hunting from Assam. Thank you.
Right, ma'am. So before we end today's session, there is one audience question for Dr. Sinha by Soman De. He asked, "What is your thought about the male witch, or what may be the reasons behind that?" If you could answer that question, sir.
Yes, yes. I think there have been few cases where the males have been accused primarily of witchcraft, basically. And when they have been accused, it is more a case of a collateral damage, right? Which is or a collateral violence, which is basically as husbands or sons or partners of women or girls, basically, or brothers, basically, right? But if you look at the constituency of victimhood, and in terms of this thing, there would be significantly more women who would be, involved with or who would be accused of witchcraft or witch hunting. But mostly in terms of the research that has been done in the last few decades, basically all of them indicate that it is more a case of a collateral violence. Though sometimes I have come across cases where the wizards basically have also been accused of witchcraft, right? And people who have been killed as well, so they have been killed. And I've come across cases where they have been beheaded as well. So the idea of a black and there is an idea about a black and white magic, basically white magic which helps you and black magic which harms you, basically, right? But there is somewhere in between that, the wizards fall, basically. And sometimes they're known as bisahas as well, right? So sometimes they have been accused of witchcraft and have been killed and have suffered, I've seen cases in Jharkhand, I've seen cases in Orissa, I've seen cases in Chhattisgarh, but mostly it is a product of a collateral violence where they get involved as a kind of extended victims, as brothers or husbands or relatives or neighbors or sons, basically of the accused woman.
Right, sir. So that brings us to the end of today's session. Thank you once again, Dr. Sinha and Ms. Baruah, for sharing your invaluable perspectives with us. I'm sure the audience who watched the live and who will be watching it later must have been equally enriched. Just a reminder to those watching, we are calling for submissions of essays, poems, and short stories related to the project. To know more about our submission guidelines and project architecture, please visit www.tellmeastory.biz. We will be back again with yet another project. Until then, good night.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.